Hi aspirants, welcome to the part 2 economics discussion for this week. So for this week we are uploading a part 2 video because this new content, this one content is really very huge. We have to exclusively see this content and this is really too important for your prelims, for your GS3 mains, for your essay paper as well. So this content is really important. So we have to discuss this elaborately and please try to pay attention and try to get the details out of it. The topic is about the World Economic Outlook. The World Economic Outlook is released by the International Monetary Fund IMF. The IMF has released the first of its two annual World Economic Outlook reports. So it releases two outputs every year. So out of this is the first report for this year. Each year, the IMF releases two World Economic Outlook reports. One in April and the other one in October. It also provides updates to these two reports in January and July. So it releases the first report in April, second release in October, and updates for these two reports come in January and July as well. So in the October outlook, the IMF was most concerned in the previous October outlook about the increasing inequality among the nations. It pointed to the dangerous divergence in economic prospects between the advanced economies such as the US and the emerging economies, for example India. So in particular, it had highlighted that employment growth was likely to lag the output recovery. So note this down. The outlook report says the employment growth was likely to lag the output recovery. So the output, if it increases by 2 points, employment is increasing only by 1 point. So this is a serious threat. The global growth is projected to slow from an essential 6.1% in 2021 to 3.6% in 2022 and 23. So you can see in the 2021 it was 6.1%, but here it is just 3.6%. The growth output is reduced, the projection is reduced. And worse than that, beyond 2023, the global growth is forecast to even decelerate more than 3.3%. A deceleration in global growth will dampen India's growth prospects, especially because it would lead to lower demand for Indian exports. So if the global growth is growing down, it is decelerating, it will impact India. Because why? Less exports from India. So if India exports less, India's growth also will reduce. And the IMF points out that this drag on output is expected to be more in emerging markets and developing economies. So the impact is going to be more for developing countries than the developed nations. For example, the United States is expected to reach its pre-pandemic trend output path by 2022. And other advanced economies also, the shortfall relative to the pre-pandemic trend will narrow. So this, after this pandemic period, which is almost over now, they'll get back to the path by 2022 itself, US. But in the case of developing countries, it's going to be worsen. And you can see this graph here. This graph will show the details. See here, the first part of the above picture, it shows the output gap. So what is output gap? It is the difference between the actual and the potential GDP. So what is this output gap? Difference between actual GDP and potential GDP. So if a country has a potential to create a GDP of 100 rupees, If it is producing only 80 rupees, then the potential gap, the output gap is called as 20 rupees. It's like that. So it can be seen in the graph that on average this gap is higher for emerging countries like India, especially in the year 2022 and 23. See the graph here. See here, on the left you have all these advanced economies or developed economies. On the right side of this graph you can see all these are developing economies. See here, for example, USA. Let us take USA as an example to explain this graph. See the example of USA. You can see that the average was negative. It was somewhere in -2. But in 2023, you can see it has gone to positive 1.5 or something. You can see here it has gone to positive 1.5 or something. But in the case of developing countries, let us take India as an example. Just have a look at it here. So this blue line shows 2020, 21, and this red line is for 2020 to 23. So in 2021, you can see that it has gone to nearly -5, and even in the year 2022-23, in this financial year also, it is somewhere at -2. And this is not just for India. You can see it is almost same for all the developing economies. Across the developing economies, you can see that the growth, the recovery is very low. So this is what the report says. So in this graph, certain things will be measured as AE and certain things will be mentioned as EMDE. So what are they? AE is advanced economy and EMDE means emerging market and developing economy. And in this graph, you can see about the inflation also. In the case of inflation, the emerging economies are worse again here also. For the year 2022, the inflation projected is 5.7% for advanced economies. But at the same time, it is 8.7% for this emerging markets, that is developing countries. So you can see it is almost 2.8 percentage points higher. And why is this? This is because of the Ukraine war. So you can see what is the sad part here. The European countries, which are considered to be the advanced economies, they are fighting there a war, and who is affected worstly here is again the developed countries. So from the perspective of India in this economic outlook, what can India see from here? India is expected to grow at 8.2% in the year 2022, and this is by far the best growth rate across all the major economies in the world. It is more than double the average growth rate of both the advanced economies, which have the growth rate projected as 3.3%, and other emerging economies, they have 3.8% as the growth rate. So these are 3.3% is the growth rate for advanced economies, 3.8% is the projected growth for the developing economies. But at the same time, if you see India, the projected growth rate is going to be 8.2%, which is the highest in the entire world. Now let us look at this graph. So let us look at this graph. This graph shows the share of GDP, the share of export, and the share of population of the advanced economies in comparison to the developing economies. So let us see in the developed economies, as across the world, if you take all the advanced economies together, the GDP is around 42.1%. So all these are data which you can use for your mains exam. Please note them down. But at the same time, the population share of these countries is just 14%. And if you see more specifically, See, United States, the GDP is 15.7 percentage share, but the population is just 4.3 percentage. Have a look at United Kingdom. The share is 2.3 percentage, but the population share is just 0.9 percentage. Very less population, but more GDP. That means the per capita income of each person is really high there. That is why the living standards are also high there. Now let us have a look at the share of GDP, export and population for emerging markets and developing economies. This is developing economies. It's not developed, it is developing economies. Just have a look at it here. If you see all the countries together, the share of GDP will be 57.9 percentage. But what about the population? It is 86 percentage. Let us take India. See, India, the share of GDP to the world is 7 percentage. But see the population that we have, it is 18.1 percentage, and China just has 18.4 percentage. We are almost closing China. Population is 18.1 percentage of the entire world. So this is the condition of the developing countries in the world. Countries which have a much higher share in the global GDP than their share in the global population. For example, all these advanced economies. Countries who share the global population far outstrips their share in the global GDP. So the population is too high, the GDP is real low. Examples like India, Nigeria and so on. And this report also talks about something called as supply shock inflation. So what is this? See here, inflation can be caused by two different ways. Either demand pull or supply push. Both can happen. So what is demand pull? So suddenly there is an increase in the salary for many people. Let us say suddenly the central government increases the salary or the state government increases salary for the people. Everyone will have a lot of money in their hands. Immediately they will what they will start to do, they will go and start to buy new things. And when they let us take for example, everyone are buying in the summertime, everyone wants to buy air conditioners. So in a particular shop there are 10 air conditioners, but 30 people go and ask for air conditioners. So what will the shopkeeper immediately do? Increase the price of the air conditioner. This is an example for demand pull inflation. So the demand is very high in the economy. This is called demand pull inflation. So what is supply shock inflation? Before talking about supply shock inflation, let us see how the bank, the RBI or what the government in any case, how they control this demand pull inflation. They could increase the repo rate, they could increase the cash reserve ratio, they could get into open market operation, that is selling government securities. They will start to sell government securities. People will buy government securities. They will not have money in their hands. They will won't go and buy too many things. So by this, the government can control this inflation. So when an inflation is caused by demand, increase in demand, it can be controlled by using things like increasing the interest rate, open market operations and so on. But if the inflation is caused by supply shock inflation, you cannot blame the bank for not controlling it. There's no way to control it. Let us say, normally during summer time, people will demand for 10 air conditioners, let us say. They go to the shop to buy air conditioners. But there is no production of air conditioners. Due to some reason, there is no production of air conditioners. In that case, it is called as supply shock inflation. So how to control the supply shock inflation? It is almost impossible. You cannot suddenly increase the production. So this supply shock inflation is really a much more huge threat when compared to a demand pull inflation. So the RBI's latest survey of the manufacturing sector shows that the overall capacity utilization at 72.4 percentage for this October December. Although the highest in 10 quarters, it is below the long term average of 75 percentage. The long term average for this is manufacturing sector is 2008-9 economic year to 2018-19. This whole period, this 10-year period is called as long term average. So the long term average value is what? It is 75 percentage. But what is the manufacturing sector now? It is 72.4 percentage only. So in the recent times this is the highest, but yet it is not equal to the long term average. So that shows that we are not 100% utilizing the manufacturing sector. It is just 72.4 percentage of manufacturing is happening right now. So this could lead to supply shock inflation, which is really a huge threat. So the government is trying to somehow face this. They are trying to increase the manufacturing. So that's it for today. Thank you. Please go through this topic very clearly. This particular topic has been elaborately discussed in the Indian Express newspaper as well. So if you find time, please go and have a look at that as well. But as far as I can, I have tried to explain it as much as possible, and I think this might be really enough for you to face to give points in a mains examination. And all the graphs that I have put in this slide, I have just taken them from the Indian Express newspaper. So this article in the Indian Express newspaper is really important. Please go and have a look at it. Thank you. Jai Hind.